So this is the lesson for 16.1. 16.1, I can write a regression equation, find the correlation coefficient, which is your R value, and then use the equation to make a prediction. You're going to be looking at three different types of functions. You have linear functions, which form a straight line. You have a quadratic function, which is your parabola or U-shape. You go up and down or down and up. And then you have your exponential function. Your generic equation for a line is y equals mx plus b. When we do the regression, your m is really your a value. That's the number that goes in front of your x in your equation. Your quadratic, you have y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And in your exponential function, you have y equals a times b to the x power plus c. So the first thing that you need to do is take your graphing calculator, and you need to make sure that you turn on your stat diagnostics. Remember, stat diagnostics is in the mode. If you don't turn on your stat diagnostics, you won't get any of these answers that we need. So when we go to mode, you have to go all the way down to stat diagnostics and turn your stat diagnostics on. Again, if you don't do that, you will not get the right answers. We are going to go to stat and edit. When we go to stat and edit, that is where your L1 and your L2 is. I already have all the numbers pre-programmed for this lesson, so that's why you see numbers there. But you're going to type numbers into your L1 and into your L2. You will go to stat and calc. Calc is up here. It's above the trace button, so, you have to go to stat and calc, move your arrow over to calc. Go down, the three things that we're going to be using are number 4 for linear regression. Don't get it confused with number 8. We're using number 4 for linear regression. For your quadratic regression, you're going to use number 5. And if we go down, 0 is your exponential regression. So those are the ones that we're using, 4, 5, and 0 only. So going back to the equations, this is how you type it in. Again, in your hard copy of notes, which is available in Schoology, you can see all these slides over again. So we're going to use 4, 5, and 0. When you write you're going to write the equation, you're going to look at your R value. A positive one is a strong positive correlation. A negative one is a strong negative correlation. You are going to use your x value back into your equation that you get to make a prediction. So for the linear regressions, again, our equation is y equals ax plus b. These are your straight lines. Please remember that anytime that you have years, years start with 0. Months, days, and everything else start with 1 on the table. But because we have years, we're starting with 0, so I numbered those already. You're going to have your scatter plot already graphed on your homework. So all that you need to do is type these numbers into your L1 and into your L2. Your years are going to be your L1. Your miles are going to be your L2. Again, we are using the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if you go to your calculator, we're going to go to calc. All right, I already have these typed into my L1 and L2. So we're going to go to calc. We're going to go down to number 4. And then we're going to go down to calculate. But first we need to change it, make sure that you're using your right ones. I need to change this to be L1 and L2. Now I can go down to calculate. When you hit calculate, you're going to see this is your generic form of your line. You have your A value that's given to you. Great, that's your answer. You can put this negative 335 right in front of your X. Your B value, for a lot of these, you're going to get big, long decimal answers. I believe on the homework I said to round every answer, every decimal to the nearest hundredth. So 2 places after the decimal point. You'll see something that says R squared and something that says R. We want the R value for linear. You're only going to use the R squared for quadratic, and we'll see why in a second. So you're looking at your R value. For your R values and your R squared values on your assignment in Class Kick, you're going to go to the 4th decimal place. So this one would really be negative 0.901. It would round to a 1 at the end. Going back to our flip chart, so for your equation, you always have your y equals for linear, you always have your x. Your a value, which is negative 335, is going to go in front of your x. Your b value, which we're going to round to the nearest hundredth, that's going to be 8,330. 8,303.33. So plus 8,303.33. Your correlation coefficient, that's your R value. That's going to be negative 0.9011. Make sure you pay attention whether it's negative or positive. To make a prediction for 2014, we need to figure out, first of all, what our X value or L1 value is for 2014. Well, if 2010 was 4 and 2011 is 5, that would make 2012 6. It would make 2013 7. 2014 would be 8. So we're really plugging in 8 into here for your X. So you're going to take this 8, plug it into your equation. When you do that, you get 5,623. Again, on your homework, I believe I said round to the nearest hundredth. And that's one complete question. That's what you're going to do for all the linear. For the quadratic, again, you have your X's, you have your Y's. This is going to be your L1. This is going to be your L2. You don't need to change anything here. You can just leave it how it is. You're going to have the scatter plot already graphed. So now we need to do our equation. So we're doing a quadratic regression. Your quadratic, notice that you have your parabola here. You can really see it. So we need to find an A value, a B value, and a C value. So when you go to your calculator, and we go to Stat, we want to go to Calc. I already typed these into my L3 and my L4. So I'm going to go to Stat, Calc. I'm going to use number 5 for quadratic. I need to change mine to be L3 and L4 because that's where I have the values typed in. And then go down to Calculate. When you do that, notice that it gives you the quadratic equation again. We need to sub in these numbers for A, these numbers for B, these numbers for C. Again, on the homework, I believe I said to round to the nearest hundredth. So A is negative 130.95. So Y equals negative 130.95, and that's going to be an X squared after it. For B, plus 98.33 when you round. And then an X, and then plus our C value. Our C value is negative 1.71. So I'm going to put minus 1.71. Technically, you could put plus negative as well. For your R value, notice that because it is a quadratic, it does not give you an R value, it gives you an R squared. Only with quadratics do you use the R squared value. Again, we're going to go 4 decimal places for your R squared value. So your correlation coefficient is 0.8958. When X equals 2.5, what's your Y value? So again, we're going to take our 2.5, we're going to sub it in for X squared, sub it in for X. Technically, you could also type this equation that you get into your Y equals, and then do second and table, and look for your 2.5, or you could just sub it in. Either way, you'll get the right answer, and in this case, it was negative 575.75. So that was your quadratic regression. For your exponential regression, we have Y equals A times B to the X power. So your scatter plot's already there. Notice that we have an exponential function. It's going up like that. It's just like half of a parabola. So for your equation, we're going to go to our calculator. Again, I already have these typed in. I know that they're in my L5 and L6. But what you would do is you would be typing in the coordinates. We're going to type them in from the table. We're going to go to Calc, and then we're going to go down to 0. 0 is your exponential regression. I know that I need to change these to be L5 and L6 because that's where I have my data typed in. Go down to Calculate. And here we have A times B to the X power. So A is 14.75 approximately. So Y equals 14.75 times our B value is 2.74. So we have times 2.74 to the X power. For your correlation coefficient, For exponential, we're going to use the r value again. You only use the r squared for quadratic. So this is really, really strong, positive 0.99999. So 0.9999. For 7 hours, we would take this 7, and sub it in for x into your equation. So just type into your calculator 14.75 times 2.74 to the 7th power. When you do that, you get approximately 32,805. So that was the lesson for 16.1. For 16.2, same type of concept. You're going to be doing a lot of the same things, except this time you have to choose which regression you're going to have. So you have linear, quadratic, and exponential. You're going to use all the same steps that we used in the previous one. 4 for linear, 5 for quadratic, 0 for exponential. So when we look at it, you can only compare when we're doing these, because you have to figure out which one is which. You can only compare an r value to an r value, or an r squared to an r squared. The closest one to either r equals 1 or negative 1 is the correct answer. So whichever one is closest to 1 or negative 1, because those represent strong correlations. You can't always tell it just from the picture. When we look at this picture, it looks like it might be maybe a negative exponential. It's sort of forming a straight line. We don't really know. So again, what you need to do is you need to type these into your L1 and L2. You need to go through every single one. You need to go through your linear, you need to go through your quadratic, you need to go through your exponential, find all the r and r squared values for each. It's going to take you a little time. You got to do each one individually, the 4, the 5, and the 0 for the regression, to find all 5 of these r values. So when you take a look at these r values, I already did it to save some time, you want the one that's closest to 1 or negative 1. Well, 0.9s, it's not going to be this one. This one has a 0.8. 0.92, 0.96, 0.99, 0.94. Well, I can see that 0.99 is your closest. So this is a quadratic. And then you got to go back to the quadratic, and just like we did in the previous lesson in 16.1, you have to write your equation. So figure out what your a value is, your b value, and your c value. For this one, we would have y equals negative 15.18 x squared, because negative 15.18 was your a value, minus 3.25x, negative 3.25 was your b value, and then plus 898.93. And that's your c value. For the next one, again, type these into your L1 and your L2. You need to find all 3 of them. Go through look at your r values for linear, your r squared values for quadratic, your r and r squared for exponential. You need to find all 5 of those. When you go ahead and do that, now we're comparing. Whichever one's closest to 1 or negative 1 is your answer. I can see that I have a 9.0 and a 9.5, so it's not going to be either one of those. We have 9.9, 9.9, 9.9. We have an 8, 9.9.8. So this is definitely going to be the one that's closest to 1 or negative 1. So that means this is exponential. Then go back and find your a value and your b value. So we have y equals 5.67 times 1.47 to the x power. The other type of question that you're going to have look like this, where they sort of have a quadratic already graph there. They're trying to figure out where that line would be, and then they have like a little curved line, which is an exponential. What you need to do to get your L1 and L2 in this type of question is you need to look at the scatter plot and find the points. Your x value goes in your L1s, your y values go in your L2s. So remember that all points are written x comma y. Your first number is how many you go over, then how many you go up. Those go into your L1 and L2. Because we're only looking at quadratic and exponential in this one, you don't have to do linear. Well, since we don't have to do linear and we're only comparing quadratic and exponential, you don't have to find your r, because remember we can only compare r squared to r squared. So when we take a look at this one, we have 0.89 and 0.97. 0.97 is closest, so this would be exponential again. If we take a look at the last one, again, they graphed them for you. To get your L1 and your L2, you need to look at your coordinates. For example, this would be over to 10 up to 50, over to 20 up to 200. The one that is closest to 1 or -1 in this case would be your quadratic. 0.7 is closer than 0.04, so this would be quadratic. On these last two examples, you didn't have to find the equation because the equations are already there, so it's less work. Go ahead and do your class kick assignments for these. Remember to turn on your stat diagnostics.